Breaking. Britain just now lost the Middle East. 48 hours ago, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, left covert oil talks in London. There was silence, a private plane vanishing into the night, and neither a statement nor an explanation. A level 4 diplomatic alert has now been issued by British intelligence. The greatest shortfall of war. What took place in that room, and why has a junior diplomat vanished? Click subscribe if you want to learn how quickly power changes in the real world. What happens next will change the future of Britain. Publication of this was not intended. Behind the dark doors of Downing Street, there are no cameras, no reporters, just quiet diplomacy. The de facto king of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, arrived under strict security. His very appearance was controversial due to years of accusations and indignation over human rights, which have made him both feared and sought after worldwide. However, since this was not a courtesy visit, the British government disregarded their worries. It was a mission of rescue. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, sorely needed this agreement. Winter is almost near. The cost of fuel is skyrocketing. After years of poor management, Britain's electrical grid is still in disarray, and European supply chains were on the verge of collapse due to war and sanctions. Starmer's inner group had been getting ready for this for weeks. An enormous oil deal that would stabilise the British energy market and show the world that Labour could succeed where the Conservatives had failed. The strategy appeared straightforward. Gain billions in energy security by winning over the Crown Prince and offering strategic cooperation. However, politics is never clean, much like oil. Everything fell apart in less than a day. Whitehall insiders revealed that the discussions started on the first day. The British team was taken aback by a clause given by Saudi officials. They called for unrestricted long-term access to UK energy infrastructure. This was a non-negotiable issue for MBS. It was political suicide as a cost of doing business with Star, an outright attack against British authority. The Prime Minister declined. A silent battle of egos ensued. UK ambassadors pleaded with both parties to come to an agreement. However, Starmer was accused by the Saudi entourage of not upholding commitments reached during pre-summit talks and of posing for headlines. Despite pressure from his own MPs and an antagonistic media, Starmer remained steadfast. There were threats, heated voices, and then silence. The Crown Prince had vanished by midnight. By morning, his private plane had taken off from London airspace after he had cancelled his remaining meetings and departed his hotel. There was a lack of explanation and a flurry of conjecture. Instead of a farewell or a joint statement, a diplomatic catastrophe greeted the world. This is where the story becomes sinister, though, because, according to intelligence sources, there was a second idea that was discussed but never made news. British military advisors had allegedly negotiated a deal for a classified defence package. Provide Saudi Arabia with state-of-the-art AI surveillance technologies similar to those employed by GCHQ and MY5 in return for 10 years of favourable oil prices and assurances of energy security. On paper, energy, money and influence were all resolved. However, it is said that the Prime Minister recoiled after being briefed. Giving surveillance technology to a government accused of killing journalists, stifling dissent and violating human rights carried an excessive moral burden. The Saudis left after Starmer immediately killed the proposal. The fallout has been fast and severe. In Riyadh, Saudi officials are briefing regional partners that Britain is unreliable and weak. The identical statement is repeated by state media channels throughout the Gulf. London is no longer a lion. The sound is like a whisper in the wind. A symbolic funeral for Britain's power in the Middle East is being written. Additionally, Saudi oil contracts are already being inked in Beijing, New Delhi and Budapest, China, India and Hungary. All approved the same infrastructure plans that Britain rejected. Favourable pricing and strategic alliances that were only a few days ago being discussed with the UK are now available to nations. It was a pivot rather than a walkout, and Britain was simply removed from the map. The political earthquake at home is just getting started. Anger is growing on London streets. Outside Downing Street, demonstrators hold posters that say "No blood for oil" and "Britain for sale." Unplanned protests are breaking out in Manchester, Bristol and Leeds with no clear leader, no single party line, just fury. Anger about backroom agreements made without the public's approval. Rage that foreign interests could control parliamentary survival. Even more savage is the backlash. Starmer is being accused by Conservative opposition leaders of ruining the most important energy agreement since World War II. Defence hawks said that Saudi Arabia would become more entwined with Beijing and Moscow if it turned away from Riyadh. One former minister was furious, saying, "We just gave China the Gulf." However, a more sinister reality is becoming apparent beneath the commotion. Parts of secret documents have been disclosed by Foreign Office whistleblowers. According to accounts, the Saudis demanded more than simply access to infrastructure at early briefings. They called for immunity. Certain Saudi nationals under British jurisdiction are granted immunity, a provision that would prohibit any kind of arrest or prosecution on UK soil. That wasn't just ridiculous to start, it was unacceptable. An outright assault on the legal system. He is said to have called out, "We walk, but even honour has consequences." Global markets responded within hours of MBS's exit. The pound fell precipitously. Futures for oil surged. Allies in Europe were noticeably silent. Additionally, the United States released a statement wishing Saudi Arabia and Britain fruitful future discussions. Translation, "You're by yourself." Energy experts are now cautioning that Britain may see rolling blackouts, fuel restrictions and record prices by February if it doesn't find a quick substitute. There is something else going on. Even as the clock is running out, this diplomatic situation is becoming a full-fledged security catastrophe due to something the Saudi negotiations have resulted in the disappearance of a junior official. Although his identity has not been made public, sources attest that he had access to Downing Street and Riyadh's internal correspondence, negotiation transcripts and classified briefings, last seen leaving Paddington Station to board a train. The destination is not known. In security footage, he is seen holding a black satchel that is thought to contain classified data. While clearly upset, a restricted investigation has been started by MI, indicating a possible national security breach. Online theories are proliferating. Blackmail, betrayal and a fugitive whistleblower. Even foul play is suspected by some. However, there is a worse murmur coming from intelligence insiders that the success of this conference was never intended, that Mohammed bin Salman did not travel to London in order to engage in negotiations. He came to put Britain to the test. Gauge its vulnerability, desperation and willingness to submit to a stress test masquerading as diplomacy. And Britain failed because Riyadh's message has been crystal clear in the hours since his departure. It was cool, deliberate clarity, not rage or threats. MBS alluded to alliances already in motion and a world realigning without Britain in a terrifying encrypted message purportedly delivered minutes before his flight took off a sign that the future being shaped in the East no longer depends on London. Britain is no longer a lion, a Saudi official told local media. It is like a whisper in the wind. Every corridor of power, from the Gulf to Brussels to Beijing, is currently echoing that slogan. Everyone is keeping a close eye on Britain's downfall. Panic has taken hold inside Downing Street. Starmer was persuaded by advisers to address the country directly, describe the collapse, explain the choice, be strong. Others cautioned that any misstep, any sign of hesitation, and the fragile public trust would evaporate. The Prime Minister decided to remain silent. Silence, however, is not safety in such circumstances. It's petrol. Starmer is reportedly isolated, under siege, and becoming more unpredictable, according to anonymous MPs. Some are talking about early resignations in private meetings. A hasty election is being proposed by others, because people in Britain are no longer curious about what transpired. They want to know who approved the immunity clause, who let this deal go forward in the first place, who informed the Saudis that Britain would give in, and above all, who stands to gain from this breakdown. Some claim that foreign influence is at blame. Others suspect internal sabotage, but a new notion that the Saudi withdrawal was orchestrated to expose Britain rather than punish it is gaining traction online. Make a divided parliament's weaknesses clear.